Hello, I'm Ed Needham, editor of the fabulous literary magazine Strong Words, and this is my podcast, The 5 Rules of Writing. In each episode, I speak to a most excellent writer in a particular genre about how they do it. And if you'd like to know more about Strong Words, and specifically how to subscribe, go to www.strong-words.co.uk and you'll be whisked straight to the website. Hello and welcome to the 5 Rules of Writing, brought to you by Strong Words magazine. Now, this is a podcast where I talk to writers about the 5 things they know to be true in writing whatever it is that they write for a living. So whether that's prison romance novels or gags for Bake Off, there are some aspects of their work that are absolutely non-negotiable. Now, today, I'd like to welcome a most excellent and inspiring broadcaster, journalist, creator of legendary magazines and now writer of handsome orange volumes of rock history, David Hepworth. David, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good, and thank you so much for joining me. Now, before we get to your 5 rules, I remembered something when I was launching Strong Words magazine. You very kindly met with me to talk about some of your experiences of independent magazine publishing. And during this conversation, you shared with me, with an almost schoolboyish shyness and disbelief, your delight that having had 2 books published, you are now officially allowed to call yourself a writer. Now, I can't remember who it was who implemented this 2-book rule, but does it still give you the same shiver of pleasure to know that every time you look in the mirror, a writer stares back?
I think it was actually Meg Rosoff who told me, "Oh, you can call yourself a writer now. You know, you've written 2 books, yeah." And because prior to that, I always called myself. People asked, "What do you do?" And I used to say, "Well, I spent most of my life in magazine publishing." You know, and it's kind of thing you don't mind discussing further if the person is genuinely interested, but if they're just pretending to be interested, you'd rather move on to another subject entirely. Mm-hmm. And the problem is, when you say you're a writer, they go, "Oh, really? What kind of thing?" Thinking you're going to say, "Oh, I'm actually the person who wrote Harry Potter," or, you know, some thriller. And then when you say, "Well, no, they're mainly books about music." "Oh, really? What kind of music?" And then you have to kind of go into that. So, yes, it's partly a bit of a relief to be able to call myself a writer. I put it on applications now when I have to fill in forms. Author. I put author.
Very good. Well, congratulations. And your book output, quite prolific over the last few years, but also very sort of tightly marshaled in a quite sort of specific niche of sort of late 60s, 70s rock. You know, you've written on the significance of the LP, the rise and fall of the rock star, how the British bands kind of reversed the tide of American music coming to the UK and exported music back, the Americans' own music back to them. How did you identify your niche?
Well, that was the story of how I came to write books, because I'd worked all those years in magazines, and nobody in publishing had ever asked me, in book publishing, had ever asked me to write anything, with one tiny exception, but it doesn't really count. And I was approached by an agent who was looking for somebody to write a book about the 50th anniversary of Blonde on Blonde, Bob Dylan's Blonde on Blonde. I said, "Well, it's very, very nice of you to ask, but I don't think I can add anything to the story of Blonde on Blonde. But I would like to write a book about music in 1971. And he said, "Oh, really? Why?" And I said, "Well, I once wrote a column in Word magazine saying the annus mirabilis of the rock and roll album was 1971. And it is a theory that I've come to believe more and more." And he said, "Oh, that's an interesting idea." So I wrote a proposal and a sample chapter and so forth, and shopped it around, and it got absolutely no interest whatsoever. Apart from, at the end of the day, Bill Scott Carr at Transworld said, "No, I kind of like this," and so we did a deal with them. And I remember saying to the agent, I said, "Do you think he likes the book, or does he like me?" He says, "No, he likes you." And which is not a bad thing, because he obviously thought, well, this is a bloke who can go on the radio, or who can stand up the idea, or his theory about 1971, which is a very important part of the kind of the arrangement with an author nowadays. But then the book did surprisingly well, to the extent that there's now about to be a film based, multi-part streaming, coming to your local Netflix very soon. Grand film all about it. And so that's how the 1970s came to be very central to the whole deal. Because I think what everybody realized, that people will read books about, they read books about music, even though they don't read periodicals about music anymore, but they certainly read books about it. And they're probably more likely to read books about the 70s and maybe the 80s than any other time, because the number of people who remember the 60s declines all the time. The number of people who remember the 50s declines all the time. And I don't know, the 90s haven't yet arrived in those particular crosshairs. So ever since then, the other things I've done, Uncommon People, The Rise and Fall of the Rock Stars, Fabulous Creation, which is about the LP, they tended to be in that 70s period. There's a bit of a sweet spot, I suppose, there. And also you get into loads of interesting things, like I believe you can't have rock stars. You can no longer have rock stars because of social media. Social media has made the profession of a rock star utterly impossible, because they've been spending all the time apologizing. Whereas the glory days, if you like, we're in the 70s. So that's where we ended up there. I think it's not the only place, but it's certainly a sweet spot.
Okay. Now, one thing writers have in common, one of the few things writers tend to have in common, is that one of the things they least enjoy is writing. Do you enjoy putting ink on paper? When I get myself into doing it, I'm not a person who can get up and crank it out absolutely every morning. But I think it's a little bit because of the nature of what I write. But then again, I'm sure all writers would say that, So it's not like, I always look enviously at kind of friends like Mark Billingham, who write crime novels or whatever. I think, well, it's just in your head. You just sit there and you invent. I'm sure it's not as simple as that. Nothing is ever as simple as that. Whereas I have to decide from out of the massive facts, anecdotes, memories, whatever that I've got at my disposal, which ones to put in this particular story, or this particular part of this story. So a great deal of my time is spent thinking about writing. And I know that sounds like idling. It's not really, because the one thing I miss is particularly during lockdown, is being able to do what I do with a great deal of my time, which is just go for very long walks, during which I'm thinking about stuff. Yes, well, we'll get onto that in a moment. But it's certainly true, isn't it, that the people are astonished that some writers, are, that you ask them what their daily output is, and they say, "Oh yes, I do a solid 500 words every day," which seems rather thin gruel. But the important thing, I think, for writers is not the process of the deciding in which order to place their words, but coming up with the brilliance of it, which does come from the bit when you're not writing, right? When you're listening to people talking on buses, or watching the bizarre interactions of people in the street, this kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. That's hugely important, that side of it.
From Strong Words magazine, these are the 5 rules of writing.
Okay, so let's get onto your 5 rules. Now, these are presumably rules that have served you well in your current incarnation as an author of rock history, but I think these apply to most any genre. Quite an extraordinary set of rules. And the first one is, if you can't write the book if you don't know what the cover's going to look like. Discuss.
Well, this is, I don't know, this probably comes as less of a surprise to you, Ed, than it will to most people, because you, like me, have, done your time in the world of magazines. And But it only latterly struck me in the world of magazines that I'd been wasting my time all these years thinking of them as media. And they're not media, they're packaged goods. They are things put together in a certain form, with the proportions just right, where the matters of tone and tone of voice are massively important. And the outside of the package, as you know from the world of the magazines, is massively important. Yes. It just is. It's a thing that communicates what you are, and it also kind of embodies your promise. And so it kind of amazes me when I come across authors who are working on books and they don't know the cover is being done by somebody they never even meet. They just kind of handed it. Now, when I was doing my first one, Never a Dull Moment, in music in 1971, very early in the piece, I was coming up with 2 or 3 potential pictures for the cover and sending them to Bill, who's the editor, publisher, and saying, what do you think about this? Yeah, I like that one. I'm not sure about that one. And let's see if we can clear that one. Let's see if we can get that one. And then we'll do that one. And it will be called this, because those words, the title will go with the picture that's on the cover. And it has to be done in a very particular way. And so it was, and it was very successfully put together by Richard Shaler, who's the art director at Transworld, who's done a terrific job on all of them. And he did it with an orange background, which you referred to earlier. And they were very pleased. It really went very well. And when it came time to do the second book, Uncommon People, they came up with a thing that looked very similar. We had a black and white picture of David Bowie, but they did it with a red background and sent it to me and said, what do you think? And I said, well, based on my experience of magazines, it's better to be identifiably the same than to be different but weaker. And if you change it from orange to red, you're different but weaker. And so why don't you keep it the same? And they said, really? Wow. Oh, okay. Oh, no, I'm not saying they're dimmer. They're clearly not at all, but the publishing, the book publishing way of doing it was to change it. The magazine way of doing it was don't change it.
Yes.
And so now we're kind of however many books in, and people during lockdown, people message me saying, I've just been watching this, minor cabinet minister being interviewed at home on Zoom, and he's got 2 of your books behind him on the shelf. And the reason I think you see that is because that distinctive orange is there. So
well, I have at least half a dozen of them, and they're very they're very distinctive. There's something also I think about orange in the the language of color. I think orange is the happiest of all colors. It's the color which has fewest sort of negative connotations. So it's that's how people react subconsciously to orange.
Yeah, and it's also in that particular format, it's a combination of the orange of the background color and the black and white of the picture. The picture's got to be black and white, because it's got to feel, because black and white pictures just look cooler on the covers of books, and what you're conjuring, knowingly or not, in using those pictures is a kind of a lost world of authenticity that people really relate to, So, that's what I do believe. And I'm supposed to be working on a book at the moment, and the classic illustration of the old joke about the 2 people, I'm working on a book. Oh, really? Neither am I. I think one of the reasons I'm not getting on with it quite as fast as I should be is that none of the titles I've come up with it so far have quite hit the spot. It will, but I think that's really important. Having the name of the book is really important, and it's magazine thinking.
That's a very early stage to be stumped, isn't it? And the title, the very first words to
Well, I think probably a lot of books are written without people knowing what the title's going to be. Well, they come up with a title, then it gets kicked into such. Whereas, yeah, I like to have a firm idea of all that stuff. All the outside of the package as early as possible in the day.
Well, in the current issue of Strong Words, there's a piece about how Jaws was written, the book Jaws, and they didn't have a title until about 20 minutes before the book went on press. It was actually pretty much, good to go, but they just couldn't think of one. And they had 200, the editor or the guy sort of responsible for putting it together, I think he said they come up with about 250 ideas, most of them massively pretentious, the something of the Leviathan and never going to work as this great popular pulp novel. And so Jaws was the only word that they could come up with that seemed to somehow summarize everything they wanted, and that fit on the
and it fits. That would be the point. The art director would be the person going, "No, great, it fits. Yeah. You don't have to run it on its side, all that." And what a brilliant piece of branding that is still all those years since. You can summon it up really quickly, can't you?
So that's extraordinary. The famous film poster was came from the paperback.
Yes,
design of the paperback. The shark rising like no shark has ever risen. I don't think sharks.
Yes, coming that way.
do the vertical, but anyway, that's a piece of good publishing. It's very good. Okay, number 2. So it says it doesn't matter whether people agree with your argument, so long as they find it interesting.
Well, yeah. So my books, and I think it's probably going to be a thread goes through all these rules, which is, I've grown up on kind of short form writing, if you like, comparatively, relatively short form writing. When in the world of magazines, a 3,000, 4,000 word piece is quite a long piece, whereas a book is obviously under 1,000 words or more. And so I've approached my books as if they were long features in magazines. That they are an argument. The first one was 1971 was the Annus Mirabilis of the rock album. The second one was Uncommon People, the rise and fall of the rock star. And the key thing about that in that expression is the fall, because you're making it clear there's an ending.
Right.
I do think the definition of a story is it has an ending. Even if you're the person who put it there, that's what a story is. And so, I then, a fabulous creation about the listening to records on an LP was different from listening to it on a CD, and it's not just a qualitative thing; it's a cultural thing. And so, as you then inevitably you publish the books, and if in normal times you'd be going around talking about the books in bookshops and literary festivals and whatever, and so you stand up and you kind of make your pitch, and all you're asking people to do is just hear you out, and because you ought to be coming up with an illuminating and interesting way of looking at something that people haven't thought about in those terms before. And, it doesn't matter whether they agree with you. Inevitably, when I talk about 1971, at the end, there will always be somebody a hand will go up and they'll say, well, it's very good. I enjoyed your book. But don't you think it should be 1969 or 1972? And I always say the same thing, which is, if that's what you think, write your own book. Please be my guest. And I'm glad you've read mine to compare it with. I'm not saying I'm not saying it's unarguable fact. I'm saying it's a useful lens through which to look at things,
right?
Because it tells you something about music. That's the point.
And a big part of the sort of Hepworth brand has always been to state your opinion as fact. Is this Is this a vital part in the sort of
It's
showmanship
an
of
old.
writing?
I suppose it is. I suppose okay, because listen, loads of reasons. You know, if you can't be, sweeping about pop music, what the hell can you be sweeping about? Because it's opinion, isn't it? And people, the terrible thing about pop music enthusiasts is they always want you to share their enthusiasms, and they always feel vaguely hurt if you don't. What, you don't like the Smiths? No, I don't, but it doesn't matter. That's just me. You do. That's fine. I'm not going to argue with you at all. But no, the fact and opinion thing, I think, very much goes back to smash hits, which I worked on with, Mark Ellen and Neil Tennant and Ian Birch, and loads of other fantastic people. And we had a terrific kind of office camaraderie, and people used to regularly hold forth in the smash hits office, saying, "Do you know what the greatest record ever made is? It's this." And it would be either Kelly Marie or it was something daft. And somebody would say, "No, I think you'll find if you check, it's not that, it's so-and-so," which is just a very amusing way, because I never, interestingly, nobody ever fell out about music on any of the music magazines I ever worked on, ever. Would never have dreamed of doing, because relationships with people were far more important than that, Whereas I do know music magazines where people have fallen out about music, and I just think that's pathetic. God's sake, it's music.
Right.
Real life is over here. That's more important. So yeah, people do it. It's a thing that works certainly works in a live setting, which is. I did this when I was talking about Fabulous Creation, my book about the LP, and I think Mark Ellen suggested this to me. He said when I was planning to go out and do stuff in bookshops and literary festivals, he said, "You should finish with a list. Finish with a list." People like that because I'd finished with a list in 1971 or whatever, and so I just go, "These are my 10 favorite LPs." In reverse order, And when I did 1971, I would say, at the end of it, I'd say, because I think it's always good for people to go away from these events feeling they've learned something factual. I'm going to tell you what the 10 greatest LPs of 1971 are in reverse order. And I'm going to finish by playing you the best bit of the best track of the best record. And it's amazing. You say this to a room full of people, and they're all leaning forward,
nodding their heads.
Going, "Oh yeah. Go on, tell me." And all there is one bloke who's stood there and gone, "I'm telling you, these are the 10." And that's just fine. It's what makes the world go round.
Well, I think I
don't expect people to believe me.
It's a brilliant piece of advice in a way, isn't it? I think anybody who is ever blocked for writing whatever book, a work of fiction, a cookbook, whatever it happens to be, if you're stuck, do a list. I think you can't go wrong with a list.
No, yeah, you can't.
A universal format.
And particularly in reverse order. They're better in reverse order because there's a bit of drama.
A countdown.
Yeah.
Yes, quite.
Yeah.
Now, this next rule is worthy of Oscar Wilde, I think. It's give people a good opener and they'll forgive you anything. Give them a good ending and they'll love you forever. How does this work?
Well, I pinched "give them a good opening and they'll forgive you anything" from, I think, Oscar Hammerstein, the co-composer of great musicals.
Mm-hmm.
Who that's what he discovered in years of doing Broadway shows. If you got a really good opening number, that gets you to half time, I think is what he said. You could have had any old dreck after it, If people think, "Wow, the first 10 minutes was fantastic," they're still
to introduce the cast, aren't they, in a musical? That's you've got to have everybody on stage. And
absolutely, you do. Yeah, I never thought of that. Yeah, they've shown you everything. It's like I'm always interested in all this stuff. Robert Forster of the Australian group, the Great Go-Betweens, wrote a very good book called The 10 Rules of Rock and Roll. And one of his rules is, I think number 6 is, after the third number, a band has nothing left to show you. I thought it was a really good point, because you've seen all their toys. You've met them all. You know roughly what it's going to sound like, you know. So anyway, going back to the book, yes, you know, I traditionally, the way I structure my books and the way I write my books is that they will tend to start with quite a long introduction, opening chapter that sets out the argument, I suppose. And, you know, it's a classic case of the old theory of, you know, you tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them what you've told them. You know, those are the 3 bits broadly of what I do. And so the first bit has got to be winning enough for them to, I think if you write a long enough opening bit, they should almost feel they've got their value for money.
By the end of chapter 1.
It's a long chapter 1, you know. Mm-hmm. And have you ever read The Surgeon of Crowthorne by Simon Winchester?
No, I haven't.
Fantastic, classic kind of narrative non-fiction. It's subtitled A Tale of, I think it's subtitled A Tale of Murder, Madness, and the Oxford English.
Yes, I have read this. Yes.
Well, you may remember, it's got a fantastic opening chapter where the guy is putting together the first Oxford English dictionary, goes to meet one of his contributors and goes to a mysterious place. I won't spoil it for anybody. And the last line of the opening chapter, you sit there and go, wow, money well spent, even if you tell me nothing else, you know what I mean? And because you feel, if you lost that book, then you would be really cross. If your wife stole it or whatever, you know, or threw it away, you'd be furious.
Or you made the terrible mistake of lending it to someone, which is the same as never seeing it again.
Well, absolutely. Because by then you really want to read the rest of the book. So I think that's what I'm saying in that opening thing, the opening chapter, which in my case is more than a chapter. It's usually an introduction, and it might be kind of, I don't know how many words, but it might be about 6,000 or 7,000 words, and a bit similar when I get to the end. So, you know, introduction is tell you what I'm going to tell you. The chapters are I lay out what I tell you, and then at the end, the finale where I tell you what I've told you. And what I find is that I find it best if I write the whole of it apart from the ending, and then leave it for a while, and then go back and really approach the ending. Because, and this is one of the things I learned in magazines, there's a kind of fatigue sets in when you get near the end. You just think, oh, please, God, let me get to the end. I'm never quite convinced by that, you know, when I watch, you know, the Misery, you know, where, Stephen King, the film of the Stephen King film, where he's got his champagne standing by and his cigarette, and, you know, because that's the day he's going to finish the book. Mm-hmm. I think it can't really work like that, can it? You know, I don't think it does. And so what I have to find in order to write the outro, the finale of the book, I really have to marshal my resources.
Well,
you have to attack the bit at the end with as much energy as you attack the bit at the beginning.
Right. I've certainly found with crosswords, with big crosswords, the clues at the end are definitely easier. You can certainly tell that the setter has run out of steam by 57 across. You know,
well, I'm sure if they're doing it every day, they certainly would be. And that's why, that relates to what I think is probably my next rule. You've got the list in front of you, Ed, I can't remember, which is, I think writing a book has so much to do with energy and stamina.
Yes. Well, let's do that one then. It's number 4. The best thinking is done when walking. The best writing is done standing up.
Well, I tweeted about this ages ago because I was half-heartedly looking for a standing desk, and I couldn't really find successfully. But anyway, I was talking about this business of, that I can only compose when I'm walking. And people pointed out to me that loads of writers have done this. Dickens was the classic case. Dickens used to go for long walks and say the thing to himself. So Dickens, who ended up being a kind of live performer, didn't he? He started as a live performer before he wrote the stuff down and then later on performed it, which you can kind of tell in the way it's written. But I have to, and it's a frustration of lockdown and today it's snowy and icy and so forth. I ideally go for a walk for kind of an hour and a half every morning, and I will always come back with 3 or 4 ideas, always. And that's just physical movement is what makes my brain work. Whereas if I had to sit at a desk, it wouldn't occur to me at all. If I leave this room, which is the top of the house now, and go downstairs, it's not that big a house, but 2 floors, and make a cup of coffee and come back, I'll have had an idea just by doing that. Yes. If I sit here, I won't at all. And I don't know if I'm a freak in this, but that's the way I am. And loads of my work and magazines used to be sent just going out for walks with people and talking about things,
Well, I certainly found on magazines that there's no sort of format less likely to generate ideas than to put a bunch of people in a room and call it an ideas meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. The words put a load of people in a room. Oh, God, the heart sinks, doesn't it? It really does. And then the second part of this was that the best bit of writing is the best writing I find, or certain kinds of writing I find are far better done standing up. And standing up and moving about. So I use a laptop and, writing nowadays, like listening to music, is no longer an activity tethered to one room of the house. So, I could take a laptop down at the conservatory. I can, the weather's nice. I go out in the garden. I know people like Peter Feedy's. He goes out to a cafe, it's the same thing, to go somewhere and to be surrounded by something stimulating. But I find there's a certain kind of writing, which I would call kind of invention writing, that I can only do while standing up. And I think that's partly because I say it to myself at the time that I write it. And therefore, I'm quite an animated person. And so it suits me to be moving about the room. Excellent. And, normally we've got a conservatory down there. It's, as I say, it's not a big house. It's a, suburban semi. But I got a conservatory downstairs and I can open the doors from the conservatory and then the door from the living room and then the door into the hall. And I can pace all the way to the front door and then all the way back to the laptop in the conservatory while talking to myself. And I might have a sentence, half a sentence, right, worth writing down when I do that. So that's what I have found. A certain kind of writing that only works, only comes to you when your body is moving and standing up.
That's good to know.
That's what I believe.
There's no room for a chair in your writing style.
Oh, there are certain bits of it, obviously. There's got to be, revisions and all that mucking about stuff. But originating stuff, coming up with a phrase or a sentence that pleases you.
You have to be.
Because I find you've got to be in motion.
Brilliant. Number 5 is it's more important to be interested in human beings than your subject.
Yeah, I think I'm quite good at this, actually. And I've only accidentally kind of blundered into it, that I don't write books about rock music for rock fans. I really don't.
Mm-hmm.
I try and write for the general reader, if you like. And I find that I read a lot. I read an awful lot of nonfiction, and the nonfiction I relate to is the stuff where you see the humanity of the subjects peeping through rather than the processes of the world that they're in. And I'm trying to think of examples. Robert Caro's extraordinary kind of 5th volume still to come, 5-volume Life of Lyndon Johnson is, all right, it's about politics, but it's about life. It's about people,
Yes, it's absolutely
ultimately.
superb, isn't it? And I think also his book Working, which is a little sort of autobiography. I think he says about that his Lyndon Johnson, multi-volume epic is like Winston Churchill saying about one of his multi-volume things. Yes, it's a 2-volume work, and I'm already on volume 4 or something like that. It's just taken over.
Well, this is a joke I keep teasing Mark Lewison with, who's writing the massive 3-volume thing of the Beatles. I always said to Mark, am I going to live long enough to read volume 3? Because Robert Caro is yet to produce volume 5, and Robert Caro is in his 80s. And so everybody's very nervously asking, if you've read 4 volumes, there's no human being on the planet that you care more about than Robert Caro, his continued good health, because you want to read volume 5. So it's just that to me is how I decipher whether what I'm writing about is interesting. I think if I told my wife about this, would she be interested? You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
It doesn't depend on somebody knowing who, the Stranglers are or whatever. Right. It depends on being able to say, there were these 4 blokes, and imagine this for a minute. They did this, then they did that, then they did that. You know what I mean? It's stories of people.
Right. I mean, I think the feel also there's something that the sort of tech folk who have taken over the media with their websites and their platforms and the rest of it completely miss. And I think it's something that it's a point you made in one of your books about Steve Jobs and his going on about his passion for music. And I think you say all you've ever been the only passion you've been able to identify in him is for computers. And I think it's the same kind of thing, isn't it? That the much maligned content has been sort of dismissed. That the interesting, the sort of interesting core of these things has been thrown out in so many, media phenomena in preference for whistles and drums and flashy technological, capacity. But I mean, I suppose I also feel it's something that's informed a lot of your magazine output. The musicians and actors and writers, for all the genius of their output and the degree to which we might feel they speak to us personally, they're also very flawed, aren't they, and preposterous and slightly
and hilarious.
And both those things are not exclusive to each other.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's. I suppose it's one of the things that I believe about, certainly about musicians, and I think you'd probably apply it to other artists, is that, and I think it's one of the mistakes that people make when assessing them, is that they think that they have simple motivations. No, they don't. They have very complicated motivations. It's all going on at the same time. Greed, ego, artistry, minor jealousy, whim, all that stuff is all swimming about all the time. And that's what's interesting. And that's what makes them interesting to write about, because they do all have feet of clay. And, and yet they've invented this persona that doesn't have feet of clay. They are ultimately, the interesting thing about rock stars is they are their own invention. The most important day's work Bob Dylan ever did was calling himself Bob Dylan. Once you've done that, everything else falls into place.
It's all gravy.
And you're going to spend the rest of your life playing this character like Marlon Brando did, but better.
Right. And David, is there a book you'd love to write? Is there one more? Is there a pinnacle of your ambition still within you?
No, just to get this next one done that I'm supposed to do. I do occasionally, like anybody who's written nonfiction, I do occasionally think, I'm going to write fiction. And I get half an idea. And then I think, no, I probably can't see my way through to it. But who knows? Who knows?
Well, I think as you've kind of discovered this this mine, with a deep seam, which nobody else seems to know the path to. You have it to yourself for the moment. I would be tempted to stick with it and milk it for all you can, because it does bring an awful lot of pleasure to people. They're fabulous books, and let's hope that mine produces some more. This is my wish.
From Strong Words magazine, these are the 5 rules of writing.